Welcome to the I Told You So podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Ben Kohl. I started this podcast because I noticed an erosion of social discourse and how normal conversations are often fueled by polarization. The I Told You So podcast offers an opportunity for healthy discourse and effective debate. I select topics to discuss and debate with listeners and guests of the I Told You So podcast. Listeners and guests predict what will happen in the future. I track predictions and announce who predicted accurately when those predictions become true. Discussions and debates can be about any topic and should be focused on what will happen in the future. The podcast offers topics where listeners and guests can discuss and debate with the goal of predicting the future so they can proudly say, I told you so. My guest for this episode is David. Now, David asked that I not share his last name for privacy purposes, and that's fine. David grew up in a fairly strict Catholic household, and his father was even in the seminary for a while prior to meeting his mother in high school. David attended Catholic school from 1st through 12th grade and received a typical Christian education. He has a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering and enjoys CrossFit, science, technology, and learning about an array of political aspects affecting the United States and the world. David currently works as a product manager in the utilities industry. On this episode, we discuss the legitimacy of Blaise Pascal's wager as an appropriate reason to believe in God, or a God who provides eternal life after human death. Before we discuss Pascal's wager, let me provide some information about Pascal's wager. Blaise Pascal was a 17th century French mathematician, philosopher, physicist, and theologian who lived in between 1623 and 1662. Listeners may be familiar with Pascal's theory of probability, principle of pressure, and or Pascal's triangle. Blaise Pascal introduced what is called Pascal's wager to suggest that individuals embark on a consequential gamble concerning belief in God. Pascal argued that a rational individual should lead a life consistent with the existence of God and actively cultivate a belief in him. The rationale behind this position rests on potential outcomes. If God does not exist, the person suffers finite losses, possibly relinquishing certain pleasures. However, if God does exist, the rewards are immense, such as eternal bliss in heaven in Abrahamic theology, while avoiding infinite losses associated with damnation in hell. This concept first emerged in Pascal's posthumously published work, Les Pensées, or The Thoughts. And that's a 330-page collection of previously unpublished writings. Notably, Pascal's wager marks a seminal moment in the formal application of decision theory, existentialism, pragmatism, and voluntarism. Critics of the wager challenged the ability to defensively prove God's existence. The argument from inconsistent revelations underscores the presence of diverse belief systems, each claiming exclusive access to divine truths. Additionally, concerns arise regarding the authenticity of belief if it's solely motivated by potential gains and losses. The logic of the wager, as outlined in excerpts from Pascal's Pensées, operates as follows. Number 1, God either exists or does not. Reason cannot definitively determine which is true. 2, a game is in play, like a coin toss, with uncertain outcomes. 3, wagering on this game is not optional. It is a necessity. 4, we must consider the potential gains and losses of wagering that God exists. If you win, you gain everything. If you lose nothing. 5, it's advisable to wager that God exists without hesitation. The potential reward is an infinitely happy life, contrasted with a finite risk. The proposition holds infinite significance when there's a finite stake in a game. And that's with equal chances of gain and loss and an infinite reward to be gained. 6, for those who struggle to believe, they should acknowledge their incapacity to believe and strive to convince themselves otherwise. Now, what brings David on as a guest on the I Told You So podcast? I met David through a comment section on a mutual friend's Facebook post. Our friend made a post about the decrease in Catholic Mass attendance. I simply commented, Blaise Pascal's wager. David replied to my comment with, Pascal's wager is a logical fallacy. That started a discussion about being a guest on this podcast, and here we are. David is here to provide his opinion about Pascal's wager. So, David, thanks for being a guest on the I Told You So podcast. Let's start with why you think Pascal's wager is a logical fallacy. Maybe you can start by first providing more background on your upbringing and what led you to start questioning your faith, and why you have become skeptical of religion, which has ultimately led you to atheism.
Sure. Thanks for having me on, Ben. I really appreciate it. I just want to first start off by saying I have no formal training in debate at all, or religious debate. That's for sure. So if I'm sure I'll get things wrong throughout our conversation, and the commenters may have their field day with that if they choose. And if I am wrong and stand corrected, then so be it. And if they have other opinions about me personally, well, I don't care. So background about me, again, like you mentioned, grew up pretty strong Catholic household. I don't think I missed Saturday night mass once until I was 17 or 18 years old. It was just what we did all the time. Catholic elementary school, grade school, high school. So it was just, it never was an option for there not to be a God. And it wasn't ever something I ever considered. I knew that there were other religions that existed, of course. And I was always kind of taught like, well, we're the one true religion, which is kind of funny because now that looking on the outside a little bit, I realize like everybody thinks that about their own one particular religion. And then when I went to college, was the first time I was outside of my very rural upbringing, and I was exposed to, lots of other people. And then, a large impact was probably my scientific training through my degree in mechanical engineering. I mean, obviously you are trained to use the scientific method, which requires observation, facts, evidence, hypotheses and theories, and, just training your brain to question and, you have to be sure about things. If you're building something, you have to be sure about things. So that is where I kind of started to question things. And I had a couple of friends that grew up, they were Christians, but they're not in a strict Christian household or anything like that. We had several discussions, probably most of the time, half drunk, because that's what you did in college, just sitting around playing PlayStation and drinking and then just conversing about your upbringing. And they posed excellent questions like, so, what do you think about this? Or what do you think about that? Or do you really believe this? Or do you really believe that? And, and I was probably 21, 22 years old at the time. And not really practicing my religion anymore, but also certainly not a skeptic, if you will. And with those questions, then I started to dive into it a little bit more because, just personally, like I try to seek truth, like what is objectively true in the world. And so I started, doing my own research, and then it was a relatively long road. And then right about the time of my, I would say early 30s, I started actually watching a lot of debates that were available. YouTube became a thing, became very popular, and I started watching a lot of debates, and came across this small cable access TV show called the Atheist Experience out of Austin, Texas, that would post their shows on YouTube. And I started watching hours, and it was basically a live call-in show. And there were atheists that were on TV, and basically Christians or Muslims or whatever would call in, and they would have open discussions and debate topics and things like that. And it was really eye-opening to discover, history of the Bible and, where human morality, could have come from without the existence of a God. I found answers to that made sense to me from an evolutionary perspective rather than from a deity. And so there were a lot of things over this course of, I would say, 10 years that really started to, push me in that, atheist direction. And admittedly, early on, I almost became anti-theist. It was a small portion of my life where, I would deride Christians and, almost just have a sour taste in my mouth for them. And like I said, that was a short period of my life. And very quickly I realized belief in a God does provide some positivity in the society we live in. I mean, my parents are still very strong Catholics, and they're amazing people. So there's room in the world for people to be, believers. And there's also room for people in the world like me that are non-believers, and we don't have to be, at each other's throats all the time. We can find common ground in things. And if I choose not to believe and they choose to believe, that does not make us enemies. That just makes us different, and that's okay. I need to respect their beliefs the same that I would expect others to believe, or to others to respect mine. So that's kind of where we are. That's my background. Now, ultimately, the question: why do I think that Pascal's wager is a logical fallacy? And technically, Pascal's wager may not be considered a logical fallacy by the definition of a logical fallacy, but I will say, so Pascal's wager basically says, to boil it down, it says, what do you have to lose? What do you have to lose? That's basically what Pascal's wager is saying. Why not believe in a God? What do you have to lose? If you believe in a God and he exists, you are rewarded for eternity. If you don't believe in God and he doesn't exist, you don't really lose anything. But if you don't believe in a God and he does exist, you risk eternal damnation. Generally, in, like you said, in Abrahamic religions, that's basically what your wager is. But there's a couple of things to consider about Pascal's wager. Now, Pascal himself was a brilliant mathematician and widely respected. But in this particular case, Pascal's wager makes the assumption that the God you believe in is the right God. What if the God you believe in is not the right God? What if the Hindus are correct? What if the Muslims are correct? What if the Buddhists are correct? What if their God is, and the 10,000 other religions that there are? What if you spend your entire life worshiping the one God or one of the gods that is incorrect? Wouldn't that make their God potentially very upset? Isn't every time you worship your, I would assume, Christian God for the majority of our audience, if they're on that particular side, wouldn't you be making their God, the correct God, upset and confirming your eternal damnation into whatever their version of hell is, or whatever their, afterlife torture, whatever it is? Like I said, I'm not a religious scholar, so, I don't know what that is. And then something else could be said, what if the God, if there was such a thing, hated worship? What if he didn't want to be? What if the God that, supposedly made everything, let's assume that there is a thing that made everything, which I don't believe that either. But let's just say, for the sake of argument, that God did exist, and he hated praise and hated worship. Every time you praise or worship him, again, you would be upsetting that God. So Pascal's wager tends to assume that a God exists, and the one that you happen to worship or should worship is the correct one. Okay. So that's why, in my opinion, Pascal's wager doesn't really hold any water as far as any good reason to believe in a God, because it could be the wrong one. You have no idea what God wants. If a God exists, you have no idea what would make him happy, what would not make him happy. So just generally, that's my opinion on Pascal's wager. Now, on the general topic of the existence of a God, I, of course, as you mentioned in my bio that you said, I'm an atheist now. And I find it's interesting. I enjoy when people find out I'm an atheist. It's not something that I generally announce, growing up in a rural red state. Most people around me don't think like me. Most people around me think like I did, when I was 12, and I was a firm believer in, Christianity and Catholicism. But I actually enjoy having discussions with people. The thing that makes me the happiest is when people ask me questions and don't just make assumptions or, think I eat babies or something like that. So, when people ask me, if you don't believe in a God, then you don't believe in anything. And of course, that's entirely not true. I believe in most of the things that everyone else believes in. I believe in the human, the goodness of humans. I believe in nature and everything that comes with it. And people will say, what do you think happens when you die? I'll say, well, I think it's the same thing as before you were born. What happened before? Where were you before you were born? Well, you were like, parts of you existed in nature and always have, because the law of conservation of matter says nothing can be created nor destroyed. So before the sperm and the egg met, you existed as particles somewhere, but you weren't a human unit until nature happened. So when you die, I think you're buried, you go in the ground, and you return back to nature. What's the Christian saying? From ashes to ashes and dust to dust, and to dust you shall return. They got that one right. I think. I don't know if that quote is right. Again, your commenters can have at me for that one. So I think a lot of the reason that some people may believe is because they're afraid of death. Death it's probably a significant factor for the desire to believe in a God, because it provides you an opportunity for eternal afterlife and seeing the loved ones that passed before you. How great would that be if you could see, your mom and dad, or your grandpa and grandma, or your friends, or whatever, in the afterlife? That would be a wonderful thing. Admittedly, like, somebody that's an atheist, like, yeah, it kind of sucks knowing or assuming that that I'm not going to have that. But what that does tell me is that this is the one life that I get, and I better make sure that I use it. I live it to the fullest. Be kind to people while you're here. What happens when you're dead? Well, the people that remember you would want them to remember good things about you, right? I mean, that's the best thing that you can leave, probably, is your legacy. So while I'm not in my life here on earth, I'm not striving to gain some ultimate afterlife. I'm trying to live this life the best way that I can, and have the most positive impact on people that I can, because I don't know how long of an opportunity I'm going to get to do that, and I will likely, never get to do it again. I feel like we are extremely lucky to have a very specific set of circumstances that brings each human into existence. And so that's something really special, and it should be celebrated while you're here on Earth, and not necessarily just, looking to build up a number of good deeds to cash in your chips at the steps of in front of St. Peter. I think that's kind of, I don't know. I wouldn't look at life like that. I wouldn't want to live life like that. I wouldn't want to live life, only doing good things so that I can be rewarded in the end. I would imagine that a lot of people, like, that's not truly the way they live life. Good people, I don't think, are good because either they fear a hell or they want a good afterlife. They're good to others because humans, as a species, it is beneficial for humans to be good to other humans. I saw a talk by Richard Dawkins one time, the famous evolutionary biologist and the author of The God Delusion, which I actually have a signed copy. Well, I gave it to my nephew, but I have watched a lot of his lectures, and somebody posed the question, why are humans good, or what would motivate humans to be good to other humans? And it was really a question about like morality. Like, how do you have your morality if you don't have a God? And he actually gave an interesting theory, was that humans as a species, very early on, when, the earliest humans for the most recent ancestors to humans were in Africa, it was highly beneficial to the group for people to be kind to each other and to help out each other, because the goal was to propagate the species. So if anybody was, would wrong someone, likely it was your kin, because the population was so small that you would be hurting those in your own internal group, and that wasn't positive for the outcome and survival of that group. And after generations and generations and generations and tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of years, that eventually became an inherent trait in the human species. And it's not in just the human species. You look at in the animal kingdom, there's many, many, many examples of even animals outside of their own species looking out for other animals. Sure, we all have seen videos of, the cheetah hunting the gazelle. Of course, we've all seen that. That's the circle of life. But then there's also, plenty of other videos where you see an animal in distress and a different animal in another species comes to help out. Obviously, there's no God motivation there. That is an inherent instinctual aspect of animals to protect one another. So I don't find the need for a God there either. So when it comes to atheism, I'm not someone that claims there is no God. I'm someone that says, for those that claim there is a God, the burden of proof is on you. And I do not feel that you have met the burden of proof to make me believe that there is a God. So that's kind of where I stand. I don't make a claim there is no God. There could be, I don't know. I'm an engineer.
So you're agnostic then, you're not atheist.
Well, no, it's different. Agnostic doesn't necessarily mean I don't know. There's Gnostic atheism and agnostic atheism. Gnostic atheism means, to know. So a Gnostic atheist would say there is no God. An agnostic atheist is somebody that says, I don't know if there's a God. One's never been proven to me. That's where I stand. So and the reason I clarify that point is because I don't want people to think like, oh, you're an agnostic, you're on the fence. Like, no, I'm not on the fence. And I'm not on the fence because, I haven't really thought about it that much. Like, no, I've been through my journey. I've been through my transition, and the term agnostic sometimes get thrown around as colloquially as you're on the fence. You don't really know. And I just want to be clear with the audience that that's not where I'm at. But I also will not make a claim in the positive there is no God, because there could be. I have found no evidence that there is one, but I don't think that I'm not sure we can ever actually know anything 100%. There's always a possibility of something. there's certainly things that we are standards in our general world, that we know, but I always leave room for to be proven wrong someday. That is the science. That is how science works. Is you work with the information that you have, and you make predictions based on the information that you have, with the best information that you have at this time. And basically you have the entire scientific community trying to prove you wrong so they can win Nobel Prizes. And, it's so, that's how science works. Science works to always be continuing to improve knowledge on something. Even our, the big questions in the world, where do we come from? How did all of this get here? Those are topics that I'm extremely interested in. I certainly don't have the brain power to understand everything, but I'm very fascinated by the work that they're doing at CERN, for example, to try and figure out like what happened moments after the Big Bang. What was the Big Bang actually? Are there multiple universes? Are there, what is outside the visible universe? Like our visible universe right now is 13.8 billion years. That's all we can see, but the what we think the actual distance of the universe, that's a terrible thing to say. Again, commenters can have at me in that one, is like 90 billion light years. Well, if the universe is only 13.8 billion years old, that's all the further we can see. How is the universe 90 billion years away? Well, there was a period of great inflation upon the Big Bang. How is that accelerating away? These are things that we don't know the answers to. We call things like, we call it dark energy because we don't know what it is. We call things dark matter because we don't know what it is. Those things are absolutely fascinating to me, that I think, science does amazing things. And the reason I bring up that point is, you look at history, I can't think of any time in history where we thought something was because God did it. Think of back when, the Greeks used to think that thunder was the gods and lightning was the gods or whatever. Well, science came along and told us exactly what thunder and lightning are. Okay. And in the history of learning things about our natural world, science has shown us that the natural world has always been the answer. So the usefulness, the need for a God to explain things has shrunk over time significantly. As science finds things out, the need for a God, or God as the explanation, continues to shrink. Okay? So, it's as we move in that direction, maybe now would be a good time to explain my prediction.
Actually, yeah, I think it would be a good time. I was thinking about introducing it at the very end, but yeah.
Do you have any questions for me? Ben, you've listened a lot. Do you have any questions for me? And I know that, I don't know, maybe this podcast is supposed to be about me, but do you have any questions about me? I don't know if I'm allowed to get personal. Like, are you a Christian? And like, do you have questions for an atheist? Like, how would I explain this, or how would I explain that? Or, we certainly don't have to get into that if that's not, this forum isn't appropriate for that. but I'd be certainly happy to discuss those.
Well, I guess what I want to do is make sure that we're focused on Pascal's wager. And so maybe I can circle back a little bit to some comments you made in regards to atheism and agnostic. So to me, it seems to me that we started this conversation with my understanding that you're an atheist. And from what I understand from atheism is you believe that there is no God, there is no creator, there is no superior being. And so I started with that assumption, but in that conversation, the part of the conversation, you tried to clarify what you meant by that. But at the end, I may have to go back and listen again, but it still seems that you don't know for sure either way if there's a God or not, which means you're an agnostic. So, and that's really what the definition is.
Let me try to say this. Is there a teapot floating around the moon?
I don't know.
Right. What are the odds there's a teapot floating around the moon?
I mean, probably pretty small.
That's how you can sum up my belief or lack thereof in a God.
Okay, but you don't know for sure. But you don't know for sure there's a teapot or not.
You're right. Absolutely. I don't know for sure, and I don't claim to know for sure. Yeah. And I would say anybody that believes in the God, they don't know for sure either. And I think that's exactly what Pascal was trying to communicate with the wager. He wasn't really trying to communicate the existence of God. He wasn't trying to demonstrate this by the wager. He was trying to demonstrate the importance of the belief in God. So it's not about the existence of God, it's the belief in God. So to me, those are two different areas, right? So he wasn't trying to convince anyone that there is a God. He was trying to convince people to believe that you need to believe or not. Sure. Basically saying it's in your best interest to believe.
Yeah, exactly.
Can we say that? Can we say that
it's in your
Pascal was saying it's in your best interest to believe in a God?
Yes, it is. I think that's what that's what he's trying to say. Yes.
Okay, so let me ask you this. Is it in your best interest to believe in a teapot floating around the moon?
I don't think it matters.
And that's how I feel about God. I actually don't. I don't think it matters, because we wouldn't even know. As I mentioned before, we wouldn't know what a God would want. I mean, we can get into this obviously long, debate about or discussion about, the Bible and all that's
right.
All that. The podcast could be, 10 hours long, if we got into that, which we won't. But I feel like there's as much evidence for a God as there is for a teapot floating around the moon. So I have as much reason to believe in a God as I do for a teapot floating around the moon.
Which is exactly why Pascal says you have no choice on the wager.
I may not have so I may not have a choice on the wager, sure, but he says it's in your best interest. Basically, he's stating it's in your best interest to believe a God. And I disagree, because we have no idea if belief in a God or worship in a God is even what said God would want. We have no idea. No one does.
We only have manuscripts from the Quran, from very I would say quite a few other different texts that you mentioned. You mentioned other religions. We have texts from them, and we have the Bible, Old Testament, New Testament. So to me, we do have historical records to demonstrate reasons why. So here, let me put it this way. You talked about the teapot around the moon. We have no evidence. We have no written documents at all about a teapot around the moon. But what if we did? What if we did have a lot of documentation from various people in different cultures all around the world stating that there is a teapot around the moon, and you still don't believe in that teapot?
Well, sure not, because, well, that's another logical fallacy. That's the argumentum ad populum. You know, like, I believe in something because a lot of other people believe in it. Okay, well, that's not a good reason to believe in anything either. You know, I'm going to bring up the whole, you know, the sun revolves around the earth. You know, a lot of people used to think that.
Yeah.
The earth is flat. A lot of people used to think that. Again, science has proven all of that not true. And we know exactly what happens with the natural world now, in regards to that. So
why do you believe anything you just said about science then? Because that's all written by people, and other people believe those kind of topics.
Yes, but there are tests that you can do. People aren't just saying it and then other people believe it. It's because there are tests that you can do and observations that you can make, and then those are documented, and that's what people read.
Right.
Okay. So when like, do I believe things that, you know, scientists say? Sure, I do. Is that the same as believing in the Bible? No, because scientists actually perform tests that show how the physical world actually works. And those tests give us the best set of circumstances or best set of information that we have right now. Again, there is a whole scientific world out there that is trying to figure out even more answers. You know, for a long time, we thought there was, you know, the proton, the neutron, and the electron, and that was it. For a long time, that's what we thought. And then scientists came along and they discovered quarks. And now scientists have come along and found that quarks are made of other particles. And now there's discussion on, are those particles made of strings? And, you know, there's string theory out there, and like, are tiny vibrating strings vibrating at different frequencies what make up our particles now? Like, that's the edge of physics now, you know. But just 100 years ago, 150 years ago, we had the neutron, the proton, and the electron, and that was it, you know. So science continues to move in the direction of removing the need for a God.
Okay.
So that's where I'm at.
Okay. So really, if there is anything you believe in, it's our minds are the most powerful entity to believe on the planet.
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, our minds created God. They created that, but you know, I like I said, I mean, somebody could certainly potentially provide evidence to make me believe or understand that, you know, this universe was created. Like, I don't like to use the word creation for the universe because that implies a creator. And I don't necessarily, you know, I don't think that way. You know, obviously we got here somehow because we're here. How did we get here? How did all of this come about? I have no clue. I'm excited about the science that is happening to answer those questions. But for now, I am perfectly okay with saying, I don't know. Whereas I think, you know, Christians or believers will say, I know. And I'm like, no, you don't. Nobody does. You know, and that's okay. That's okay. It can be comforting to think that you have the answer for something so grand. You know, that can be great. I mean, it can be comforting to think like, well, yes, there's this, you know, master of all being that, and he or she or it or whatever makes me, I'm special and has put me here on this on this planet, and I was designed to be the father of my children, and that's a very comforting thing. And so I understand humans' desire to feel that. However, I don't subscribe to that notion. I think physics happened, and that's how we got here. Now, what is the physics that made us get here? I don't know.
Right.
I have no idea. I have no idea. But I'm comfortable with that.
Yeah.
I want to know. I'll tell you what. If there was a God, and I did have a chance to ask him something, I remember when I was a kid, somebody asked me, like, if you had a chance to meet God, one question, what would it be? My answer would be, where did all of this come from? Or why? Maybe if I only got one question, I would have a hard time deciding where did it all come from, or why did it all come from? Maybe I think I would struggle to decide which one I want to know more. And I certainly don't think that we will know those answers in my lifetime. And that will be a regret when I die. I have lived in an era of tremendous scientific advancement. And I'm extremely happy to live in a time when we are here. I mean, thank God for air conditioning and Wi-Fi. What a great time to live in. But in hundreds of years, as science hopefully continues to progress, they may unlock the secrets of the beginning. And what happens to God then? Or what happens to the notion of God then?
Well, it seems to me like this is a perfect time for you to state your prediction.
Sure. So my prediction is that within 100 years, the space for God, or the belief in God, will become highly abnormal for, I don't know how to say, modern or developed Western cultures, if you will. For those cultures that generally promote science and technology and communication, like people having internet, there's the North Koreas of the world that will try to, fight it all the way. But for those civilizations, those cultures that promote science and knowledge, I think within 100 years, the space for God will become so small that it will be abnormal to meet someone on the street that still believes in a God. That's my prediction, because I think as you've looked at how the need for a God, or where God fits in the world, has shrunk over the previous few hundred years, as we've learned more about our physical, natural world that we live in, I think that will only continue to progress. And as we learn more, I think that space is going to shrink more and more and more, to the point where God is no longer relevant. And you see that in some countries today, and again, I definitely should not be quoted on this because I'm not an expert in this, but in countries like Finland and Sweden and, those other, what's the other one? Finland, Sweden, Norway, belief in a God is relatively low. It may be well under 50% now, so greater than 50% are non-believers now in those countries. And I just think that will, for countries like the United States, Canada, Great Britain, most of Europe, South America, the majority of Asia, I think that will become the norm. Like how those countries are now, that I think that will spread. And that'll be, within about 100 years. And I think the concept of, you might read about it, like, people used to go to church every Sunday, like they used to believe this or that, whatever, like they talk about it almost in like this unbelievable sense, like how we talk about how, like, do you know how people used to think that the sun went around the earth, or that the earth was flat? Like that's my prediction for about 100 years from now, because I think science is only going to move faster in the direction of just unlocking the secrets of our natural world. And so I think people will be forced to have to come to terms with that.
Okay.
That's uncomfortable for a lot of people watching.
Could be. That's right. Could be.
Which is fine.
Yeah.
That's just one man's opinion.
Yeah. All right.
So,
well, I appreciate the comments and the thoughts. You really have spent a lot of time thinking about these issues and this topic, and really appreciate you coming on. But let me focus back on the listeners. So, because this podcast is about predicting the future, my questions to those listening are: one, have you ever heard of Blaise Pascal's wager, and what are your thoughts about it? And I really ask this because I venture to say that many are unaware of Pascal's wager, and I would even go further to say that many Christians have probably never heard of it either. Two, if you're convinced by my guest David's points about Pascal's wager, how does this change the way you live your life, or does it? Three, if more people believe or don't believe in the legitimacy of Pascal's wager, how does this affect the way humans live and prosper? So since this podcast is open to anyone to comment on, please let me know any comments or opinions you have about those questions. So you can email me or call me or text me. You can text or call at 785-473-3721, or you can send an email message to ITYS at BenKohlITYS.com. That's ITYS at BenKohlITYS.com, or simply post on any of my social media channels. If there's another platform that you prefer for this podcast or these videos, please let me know that too. So you can go to the I Told You So podcast website at BenKohlITYS. Again, that's BenKohlITYS.com to connect. And you can get your own I Told You So items at the merchandise link. I offer a safe space for healthy discourse and effective debate with the goal of predicting the future, so you can proudly say, I told you so. Also, if your business or organization is interested in advertising on the I Told You So podcast, please let me know. Thanks for tuning in to the I Told You So podcast, and thanks again to my guest, David. Followers of the podcast are very important, so please follow, like, subscribe, give a high rating, and share with your friends. So I'm your host, Dr. Ben Kohl, and I hope to hear from you soon.